2 years ago, I stood in the church foyer clutching my daughter's arm, watching the man I married wipe a single perfect tear from his eye as he spoke about loss. He spoke about 40 years of unconditional love, about the soulmate he'd been forced to say goodbye to. He spoke about the tragic, sudden death of my mother, his wife. And in that moment, under the false comfort of stained glass light, the first thought that truly pierced me wasn't grief. It was the absolute icy knowledge that he was lying. I knew exactly who was responsible for my mother's death, because a week earlier, she had whispered the whole truth to me, giving me a secret that should have died with her, a weapon against the very man holding her funeral. A secret that if I used it, would destroy my father, but if I kept it, would destroy me. The question that hung in the air, a dark cloud over the entire family, was simple. What would I do with the truth? They say that betrayal only hurts as deeply as the trust that came before it. And for me, the trust was a lifetime. My parents, Eleanor and George, were the bedrock of our small town. 40 years, that's how long the two of them built a life from nothing. They started with a small, failing dry cleaner shop, and through sheer grit, they turned it into a chain of 6 highly successful regional businesses. They were the couple you measured all other couples against, the perfect self-made story. And I was the only child, the inheritor of this seemingly perfect legacy. My father, George, was the visionary. He was loud, charismatic, and always moving. He was the one shaking hands, signing leases, and telling everyone in the room about my mother, Eleanor, the quiet, meticulous anchor of the business. She was the one who handled every single number, every ledger, every contract. My father's success was 100% dependent on her sacrifice and her trust. He was the face, but she was the foundation. I saw her put in 18-hour days for decades, putting every single dollar back into their shared dream. Every decision, every major life choice was a joint effort driven by mutual devotion, or so I believed. It was this history, this 40 years of sacrifice, that made the eventual secret so impossibly cruel. Because my mother wasn't just my mother. She was my best friend, my confidant. As a young girl, I saw the gentle toll that the business took on her, but also the pride she held in their shared achievement. When my father would dismiss a complex financial problem as just Eleanor's area, she would simply smile, knowing she held the true power. I inherited her quiet nature. I worked with her in the head office for 20 years, a dutiful daughter, and I saw the first hairline cracks begin to show, though I dismissed them at the time as simple marital friction. Dad got flashier, new cars, new memberships, new expensive clothes. Mom stayed the same. She started asking more questions about the long-term investments, and he started giving shorter answers. It was subtle, but it was there. A new layer of secrecy in a life that had always been open. She started looking thinner. She started looking afraid. Auntie Whispers is about hearing the things that go unspoken, about seeing the cracks before they break the foundation. And the memory that haunts me most now is a rainy Tuesday evening a month before she died. She called me into her home office, closing the door softly.
She looked me straight in the eye and said with a trembling voice, "Daughter, there are things your father has been hiding, and I need you to promise me something." And in that moment, I became an accessory to a secret I didn't yet know, a promise that would force me to choose between my father's reputation and my own soul. What kind of secret could fracture 40 years of perfect marriage and perfect business? And why did she feel the need to tell me before confronting him herself? The tension in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. The perfect life was a perfect lie. I didn't know it then, but this promise was the open loop that would eventually save me and destroy him. This all brings us back to that funeral where the conflict was set. My father, the consummate performer, was now the grieving widower, ready to step into his new, singular role as the undisputed head of a multi-million-dollar company, a company he was not equipped to run alone. My mother's death was ruled a sudden, massive stroke, a tragic natural end to a life well lived. Except for that one crucial detail that now burned a hole in my heart and made every comforting word at the reception feel like a lie. That night, alone in my mother's quiet office, the truth of her confession hung heavy in the air. I knew I couldn't grieve until I exposed the secret my father had so desperately tried to bury. I realized my own story was no longer about loss, but about justice, a justice I had to deliver on my mother's behalf. And to do that, I had to understand how deep the betrayal went. You see, my mother didn't just tell me a story. She gave me the weapon to finish it. And in the next part of this journey, I'm going to reveal what that weapon was. But first, can you truly believe that a secret from a dying loved one could carry the power to undo a powerful man? Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to keep a secret that felt too heavy to carry. Because the weapon wasn't a hidden safe or a coded diary. It was something far more subtle and far more binding. It was a private investigator's final report. And what he found didn't just expose a lie, it confirmed a plot that started years ago. I had promised my mother, standing over her hospice bed, that I would find the recording she'd mentioned, the one piece of evidence that would explain everything. But what I found instead was a sealed manila envelope hidden behind a loose floorboard in her closet. Inside was a bill for the services of a private investigator. The report wasn't about another woman. It wasn't a confession of past business mistakes. It was something far colder, far more premeditated. The report detailed 2 years of systematic financial bleed-out. My father hadn't been running the company into the ground. He'd been siphoning it. He'd been using a complex network of shell corporations and offshore accounts to slowly drain the company's assets, diverting millions of dollars into his personal, untraceable portfolio. And the biggest, most shocking betrayal? He had been preparing to leave her. The private investigator's final delivery was a file documenting the purchase of a sprawling, multi-million-dollar estate in the Caribbean, bought under a corporation he wholly controlled, bought in his name alone, and set to close just 3 days after he expected their divorce papers to be signed. My mother, the one who handled every contract and knew every number, had realized his plan too late. The stroke didn't come out of nowhere. It came from the shock of discovering this truth. It was the ultimate, prolonged betrayal. He hadn't just betrayed her, he'd stolen her future, and indirectly, taken her life. This deepening conflict was the engine of my new journey. The immediate problem wasn't justice. It was a matter of sheer timing. If the truth didn't come out fast, my father would finalize his sale of the original dry cleaning chain, liquidate the last of the joint assets, and fly to that Caribbean island. He would become untouchable. The primary open loop was now wide open. How would I use this secret, this investigator's report, to stop a man who had planned his escape with decades of calculated precision? The first week after the funeral was a blur of false sympathy and quiet, strategic moves. I pretended to be the grieving daughter, dutifully helping my father sort through paperwork at the office. I was hunting, looking for any other evidence, while he was basking in the new power he held. He didn't know I had the report. He didn't know my mother had told me anything. I had dramatic irony on my side. The audience of two, me and the late Eleanor, knew the secret the world did not. One afternoon, I made my first small strategic move. While he was out, I carefully searched his briefcase. I found a contract for the final sale of the company's real estate, the last pillar of my mother's legacy. He was moving fast. Later that day, I deliberately brought up a minor, seemingly unrelated detail from the dry cleaning contracts, something she and I used to joke about. Me. Dad, I was looking at the old lease for the downtown spot. Remember how Mom always called it the albatross? Said it was the only contract you ever signed without letting her read it first? His face went cold. The smile vanished. He didn't answer the question about the lease. He simply stared at me for a long, silent moment. George, you're spending too much time on old paperwork, dear. Let me take care of the details now. It's time for you to grieve, not work. The reaction was immediate and telling. He didn't feel sadness or nostalgia. He felt exposed. He knew I was looking in the wrong places, and his defensive energy was the new evidence I needed. The small confrontation, that tiny pattern interrupt, told me the chase was on. The next week brought the first real escalation. George, now wary, introduced a new high-powered lawyer to the business. The lawyer's first action was to send me a formal, aggressive notice. The notice stated that as George was the sole surviving shareholder and controlling partner, I was to immediately vacate the office I had held for 20 years. My access to company servers was revoked. The note concluded with a veiled legal threat. Any further attempts to access proprietary data will be treated as corporate espionage. This wasn't just a business move. It was a personal strike. He was trying to neutralize me, to cut me off from the digital trail I was hunting. I called the family lawyer, a kin man named Tom who had known me since I was a girl. He was shocked by the aggression. Tom, he's making this a hostile environment, honey. But legally, he might be right. Unless Eleanor left something, he's the majority partner. You need to focus on what she might have told you. I told Tom about the investigator's report, about the shell companies and the Caribbean escape. I asked him, can we use this to file a temporary injunction on the sale of the business? Tom paused. The evidence is strong, but it's circumstantial. We need something tying the theft directly to the company. We need an official document that shows his intent to exclude Eleanor. We need the hidden will. This was the first time the idea of a hidden will was introduced, and it immediately opened a huge new loop. My mother had told me she was planning an update to her will, a way to protect my inheritance and the business from my father's predatory behavior. But she died before it could be finalized. Or did she? I realized my search had just gotten harder. The investigator's report gave me the why and the what. Now I needed the how. I needed the legally binding document that would override a lifetime of marriage contracts. If I couldn't find a will, my father would win, not because he was innocent, but because he was simply faster and more aggressive. The stakes were no longer just about the money, they were about validating my mother's dying truth. In the next part, I'll share the subtle, strategic planning I had to use to re-enter his orbit without raising suspicion, and how a conversation about her favorite family recipe almost led to the biggest disaster of my life.
After the lawyer's threat, I knew I had to go silent and strategic. I played the role of the defeated daughter, sending a polite, sorrowful email to my father about needing time to grieve, assuring him I respected his authority over the company. The silence made him complacent. He was a performer, and my apparent surrender was the applause he craved. Meanwhile, I was working with Tom, the lawyer, on two things: finding that new secret will and finding a financial vulnerability in George's Caribbean plan that we could exploit. The hidden will became the new open loop. Where would a woman who handled every financial detail hide something so crucial? I spent days going through my mother's old filing cabinets, but everything was meticulously organized up to the day of her stroke. Nothing was out of place. This told me the will wasn't a physical document in the office. It had to be electronic. I realized I needed access to her home computer, which my father was now using exclusively. I needed a cover story, a believable pattern interrupt. I called my father and tearfully told him I couldn't stand the sight of my mother's house, but that I desperately needed her famous comfort food recipe for her Sunday pot roast, a recipe she kept on a single old laptop file. The plea was emotional, not financial. It hit his identity as the caring father he was pretending to be. "Oh, my dear, of course. Come by tomorrow morning. I'll make you coffee. We can look together." The "we" was a trap, and I knew it. But the risk was necessary. I needed 2 minutes with that laptop unsupervised. The next morning, I arrived at the house. My father, all concerned eyes and soft words, sat me in the kitchen. He poured the coffee. "It's been so hard without her, just devastating." As he spoke, he gestured to the laptop, which was open on the kitchen counter. I saw my chance. "Dad, I can't believe I forgot. I promised Mom I'd take her favorite little succulent plant from the windowsill and put it in my garden. Do you mind if I just grab it? It'll just take a minute." He hesitated for a microsecond, a tell I had seen 1,000 times in his business dealings, before giving a small, weary nod. "Go ahead." I went to the living room, grabbed the plant, and then, instead of going to my car, I doubled back. I slipped into the kitchen. He was gone from the counter, setting down his cup to answer a private call in the den. I raced to the laptop, and thanks to my knowledge of my mother's meticulous filing, I found the new will. It was an encrypted file, a digital weapon, but the password was the name of her childhood dog, a code only I knew. I quickly copied the file to a small thumb drive, barely breathing. As I did, I glanced at the 2 coffee cups on the counter. Mine and his. And then I saw it. A tiny,
almost invisible white residue at the bottom of his empty cup. I dismissed it as unmixed sugar. I went back to my car, triumphant with the will, and drove home. Then, about an hour later, the lawyer, Tom, called. "It's George. He was rushed to the ER. Severe cardiac event. He's stable, but they suspect poisoning." My blood ran cold. The white residue. I looked at my own full, untouched cup of coffee from that morning. I had been the target. My father hadn't been on the phone. He had been giving me time to take the coffee he had intended for me. The heart attack was a cover story. He had successfully poisoned himself with a non-lethal dose to frame me as a desperate daughter trying to eliminate the patriarch. My God, I had almost been a victim of an eviction notice followed by a poisoning attempt. The major twist was clear. He was far more dangerous than I had imagined. The phone call from the hospital was followed by a visit from the police. They had evidence from my father's cup, a small crushed pill that matched a prescription bottle they conveniently found in my name, a mild anxiety medication I took after my mother's death. They had an eyewitness in the den, his new lawyer, who confirmed I was the last person to serve him a drink. I was under immediate investigation for attempted murder. My father had successfully turned the tables. The legal threat was now existential. "Police, Miss, we have to ask you one question. Why were you so desperate to get your hands on the company's files this morning?" This was the moment of the game-changing reveal. I could either protect the digital will and go to jail, or use it now, here, in my defense. I looked at the lead detective and quietly said, "I wasn't trying to hurt him. I was trying to stop a fraud. And the file you should be looking for is on my mother's old laptop, showing the truth of his financial crimes, the one he's using to plot his escape to the Caribbean." I handed over the thumb drive containing the will. Tom, my lawyer, was ecstatic. The will not only left me the controlling interest in the dry cleaning chain, but it contained a clause that was the ultimate checkmate. It stated that any assets proven to be removed from the business with the intent to defraud the partner, Eleanor, would be immediately transferred to a charitable foundation dedicated to empowering women entrepreneurs.
He would get nothing. My father's poisoning attempt had been his final, fatal mistake. He had gone so far to frame me that he had left a financial paper trail on the laptop. And more importantly, he didn't realize I already had the weapon. The open loop of the hidden will was finally closed, but a far bigger one opened up immediately. Would the police believe my word over a respected businessman, even with this digital document?
We enter the courtroom, the climactic payoff, and I will share the final reflection on family, money, and the power of a mother's enduring love. The battle didn't happen in the company's boardroom or in the quiet of my mother's office. It happened in the cold, public spotlight of the courtroom. My father, George, was now the one who had to testify, not as a bereaved widower, but as a man under suspicion for both fraud and self-poisoning to frame his own daughter.
He attempted to use his narrative, the hard-working businessman devastated by his wife's death, now victimized by a greedy child trying to steal his legacy. It was a powerful performance, but I was holding the script. My lawyer, Tom, introduced the evidence, the investigator's report, the shell companies, and the finalized encrypted new will. The will was the delivery on the Hook's promise. It proved my mother knew exactly what was happening and had taken steps to prevent it. But the final, crushing moment was the simplest piece of evidence. Tom had managed to obtain the metadata from my father's own emergency call. It wasn't a call from a man in sudden, agonizing distress. It was a 4-minute call to his lawyer placed before he called 911. He was not a victim. He was an actor, ensuring his legal narrative was established before the ambulance even arrived. The judge dismissed the charges against me and immediately froze all George's assets, including the Caribbean Escape Fund. The new will, now validated, put the entire company into the control of the foundation my mother had secretly established, an irrevocable trust dedicated to empowering women entrepreneurs. My father lost everything, not because of a sudden act of revenge, but because of 40 years of quiet, meticulous planning that my mother had done for both their success and ultimately for her protection. In the end, the woman who handled the details won against the man who only handled the show. The tables had turned dramatically and irrevocably. The emotional payoff was complete. My mother's final wish for justice was fulfilled publicly and powerfully. Standing there, watching him led away, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a profound sense of release and deep, quiet sorrow. This wasn't about the money or the businesses. It was about the shattering of a lifelong belief in what family meant. The wisdom I gained from this journey, my own heartful healing takeaway, is this: trust the whispers, the little voices of doubt, the subtle inconsistencies, the feeling in your gut that something isn't right. Those are not anxiety. They are your intelligence. My mother knew something was wrong long before she had the evidence. I should have paid closer attention to the fear in her eyes, not the smile on my father's face. Legacy is in the foundation, not the face. My father's loud, aggressive legacy vanished because it had no genuine foundation. My mother's legacy, built on quiet, meticulous work and a final act of generosity, will last for generations through the foundation she created. The work you do in silence is what endures. The power of closure. The open loop of betrayal was closed with legal action, but the emotional loop of grief was only closed when I honored her secret. Seeking justice wasn't a punishment for him. It was an act of profound self-care for me. I am now the head of my mother's foundation. I am the wisdom keeper, dedicating my life to helping women build their own empires on solid, honest ground.
This is her final, gentle revenge. This is the new, authentic family legacy.